Good afternoon, everyone. The Standing Committee of Governmental Operations is now called to order. Madam Clerk, can you please read the Chamber Emergency Evacuation Plan announcement and public speaker guidelines?
Upon activation of the emergency alarm signal, all persons should immediately exit the building. Please use the exits to the left or right front of the council chamber or the east or west stairwell outside the rear doors of the chamber. Do not use elevators or escalators. After exiting the building, proceed down 9th Street and into the assembly area located in the former Public Safety Building parking lot. Able persons should assist visually and hearing impaired visitors with exiting the building. Public speaker guidelines. Individuals wishing to speak during public hearings and the public comment period are generally allowed 3 minutes to speak. Persons appearing before the committee are not allowed to campaign for public office, promote private business ventures, use language of a personal nature which insults or demeans any person, including comments directed at public officials or staff members that are not related to their official duties, or address or question staff members directly. All questions are to be directed to the committee chair. Failure to adhere to these guidelines may result in speakers forfeiting any remaining time, and further disciplinary action is necessary, which can include barring from attendance of future meetings of the committee for a period of 6 months. Members of the public who registered in advance to speak virtually will be called at the appropriate time, either during the public comment period or during the public hearing for the legislation on which they signed up to address. And Madam Chair, all members are in attendance today, and you do have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. If we can move on to public comment.
Public comment is now open. Is there anyone present who wishes to address this committee regarding items not on today's agenda? Madam Chair, seeing none and no one signed up to speak virtually before the 10 a.m. deadline, the public comment period is now closed and back to the committee.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's proceed to approval of minutes.
The minutes to be approved are for January 22nd, 2025 and February 26th, 2025 for the Governmental Operations Standing Committee meeting held at 1 p.m. If there are no amendments or corrections, then the meeting minutes will stand approved as presented. Those minutes have been approved. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to our first presentation of the committee.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Jordan. I am Vice Chair Whit Clements with the Urban Forestry Commission, and we are here to present our 6-month report as indicated in code that reestablished the commission. So the Urban Forestry Commission was established pursuant to City Code 8-544 to improve city urban forestry resources through policy development, advice, education, and fundraising. Since its reinvigoration, the Commission has worked to establish operational procedures, form subcommittees, and identify focus areas to fulfill its mission of enhancing Richmond's urban tree canopy. And what we have done in the first 6 months as a high level is we have taken and started to rebuild the structure and the foundation of the commission as it previously stood. So we've had a great group of volunteer citizens with little to no governmental experience in commission building, with a lot of support from city staff and also with the urban forestry staff as well. So what we've done is we've created a framework that we feel that we can start running forward in as we've established our attendances, our mission and values, and we have a more consistent structure as well as subcommittees. So we have our mission and guiding values, and the Commission's mission is to improve the city's urban forestry resources through policy development, advice, education, and fundraising as established through code. That is going to have several core values to it. First is preservation and enhancement, a science-based approach, community-driven, really getting out there and re-engaging with the citizens to help further our efforts. A focus on equity and environmental justice, climate resilience, and a focus on cross-departmental interactions so that we can start to leverage and join and partner where appropriate with other departments within the city to help extend and expand resources as much as possible. And lastly, it's the lasting contribution so that the work that we do on this commission can be codified and go to help benefit future generations. Because as we all know about trees, trees aren't just a one-time fix. Trees last for decades. And I think that's it's been obvious through the commission meetings that all the members have that focus of what we're doing isn't just a short-term fix, but it'll have decades of impact to the city. So far, we have elected officers. So we have established a chair, vice chair, and secretary, which Sophie McGinley is the chair. I am vice chair. Carlin Tracy is the secretary. And Jim Licklitter is the head of the technical subcommittee chair. To that, we have established 3 subcommittees. One, the technical subcommittee, which is going to focus specifically on tree inventory, technical aspects of urban forestry, as well as outreach and education. We have a budget subcommittee, which is going to work on helping the urban forestry department with their budget initiatives and also work on funding streams for urban forestry efforts. And then we have a process subcommittee, which focuses on procedural things and process things, much like today in this report. So those types of items. We also outlined our scope and duties. I won't go through and read all of this. Get on to the better stuff. So we did appointment procedures. So we have non-voting members and voting members, and they have a tiered cycle. So council appointed members have 2-year rotations, and mayoral appointees have 1-year rotations, and the officers all have one-year rotations in their positions. So we're going to get to the areas of interest. So several things that we're starting to focus on now are the urban forestry master plan and tree remnants monetization, which is being undertaken by our technical subcommittee to help review the materials and start providing advice and guidance where appropriate. Then the next issue, the next area that we're focusing on is working with the Richmond 300 and zoning update initiatives to make sure that the goal is to have somebody from the commission in as many meetings as possible to engage with the work that's being done so that there is that focus on environmental equity and making sure that that urban forest canopy is considered in all the decisions that they make. And then also work with the vulnerable areas assessment so that we can determine areas where there is more need for tree coverage. And then also importantly, the public advocacy and education. So making sure that we're out in the community, engaged in events and engaging other community members to help out as well. 2 more items, climate resilience, which as we all know, there is climate change happening. So we have to make sure that what we do helps benefit that. And developing more public-private partnerships. Out of this, there are several opportunities we've identified with record and recommendations. We're going to work on adopting a more formal attendance policy. It has been a challenge to make sure that we have full representation at every commission meeting. And one of the things that we've started to do with a nod to that is we're starting to alternate our timings of meetings. So we're doing alternating afternoons and evenings to make it more, or I guess to make it easier for those to attend who might not be able to attend based on timing and work commitment schedules. We're also looking to improve the district representation, make sure there is a more full coverage of the districts. Right now, I believe we have 5 of the 9 districts fully represented, but we'd like to make sure that we have a good representation from all of the districts. And that could also be going on in the future as we work to recruit and bring on new members to the commission as other members decide that their time has been served. That is what we have for the first 6 months. Are there any questions?
Well, I just would want to start by saying thank you so much. Getting the Urban Forestry Commission reconstituted has been, I think, a 5+ year process. I remember when Chris Hilbert was trying to do it. I was working on this on the Green City Commission before I was on council. So to actually be here at this moment to have a presentation at GovOps is a huge achievement. And I'm grateful for everyone involved that came down and has taken time out of their lives to make this a reality again. It's incredibly important work. As you note in your report, it has crossover relevance to so many different initiatives in the city. I also note and would say when it comes to the attendance and some of the considerations your commission is looking at to increase participation, I think that's actually a citywide discussion that this body could take on, because we have attendance issues and accessibility issues with all our boards and commissions. So we would love to partner with you guys and with all our boards and commissions to figure out what's the best path forward, and if we can make some tweaks so that it's not a one-off improvement, but maybe something that everyone can take advantage of. But just with those introductory comments, I'll open it up to my colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the presentation. This is a particular interest, especially as we're going into the thinking more about rezoning and the code refresh. And so I am particularly interested in both the master plan update, the ordinance modernization, and the zoning updates, and would welcome your thoughts and how that feedback could be formalized a bit. So, if there are specific recommendations that the commission would like to make as it pertains to existing policy or how we move forward with the code refresh, I think it would be wonderful for those present, for that to be seen and to allow, community members to be able to provide input, support. Most likely, I can tell you with certainty that in my district and from what I've heard citywide, there is obviously keen interest in ensuring that we are protecting and growing the urban canopy that we have. And so would just be eager to hear, what the specific recommendations or the process for coming up with recommendations to inform both the existing ordinance and the zoning updates.
Thank you for the feedback, and we'll make sure that we make that information publicly available, as well as seek your input on it as well too and provide it.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go easy on you, Whit. Thank you, seriously, from the bottom of my heart. For those who don't know, Whit is a 4th District resident, neighbor of mine, and has been an advocate for urban forestry and canopy long before this was even a twinkle in your eye restarting this. So thank you for everything you've done before this commission and during the commission. I just wanted to kind of dive in quickly on your comments about making sure that we have representation in other districts on the commission. There's currently no vacancies on your board, correct?
That's correct.
Great. So I know I could look this up, but are there districts that are rolling off soon that you're hoping to, I'm just thinking in terms of this body and the council as a whole being able to do some outreach to make sure that people in those districts, those targeted districts that you're hoping to have representation from, know that this is something we should be advertising.
Right. And I think right now what we've got is 3 individuals that are mayoral appointees that are going to be rolling off this year. I think the commission overall has been benefited from them being on the commission and would like to see them continue. However, what we're looking at the 8th and 9th really, and I believe the 6th. So those districts, if we could bring somebody in through the mayoral appointee process, potentially to bring somebody in, that would be beneficial to get that additional coverage out there, because we have good coverage from the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, 7th. So maybe through that process would be the first time. The next time that we have commissioners coming off will be 2026 after
Okay.
that.
Great, thank you.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you being here and just wondering if you had any final requests of the commission to help you with, or we can work offline for some of your more technical follow-up items.
I think I just want to thank everybody who is on the commission, who is here today and who has been participating in it, and all the yeoman's work that went into creating this report for you all. So, and thank you for reestablishing the commission.
Absolutely. Thank you for all the great work.
Thank you.
All right. We have 4 presentations today. Let's move on to our second, the combined sewer overflow update. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a little loud. Scott Morris, I'm the Director of Department of Public Utilities, and today I have the pleasure of going over and giving an update on the Combined Sewer System Program. So just do a general update on how our sewer system looks. If you look up here, the green section is the combined sewer section. The white section or the gray section is the separate sewer system. And then if you look at the blue section, that represents the water bodies. And overall refresher on what we have in our system, we have 8 wastewater pumping stations, about 25 combined sewer outfalls, about 140 million gallons a day of treatment capacity, and that's during a wet weather event. Dry weather events is a little bit less. And then we also have about 1,000 miles of interceptors and mains. I don't know if everybody knows what a combined sewer system is, but this kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like during a wet weather condition and a dry weather condition. Dry weather condition, all the sanitary sewer would flow naturally to the wastewater treatment plant. And then during a wet weather event, you actually see where it gets over the capacity of the system to contain. And then that's when you have a CSO combined sewer overflow outfall, which is pictured on the right. Just a general review of the regulatory framework that we're operating under. The 2005 CSO special order by consent mandated that we take certain action to have a CSO control plan, and that going through has some regulatory requirements for trying to reduce the overflows to be in compliance with the overflow policy by EPA, and that is trying to get you towards, in essence, less than 4 overflows in a year or on average, and then reducing the pollutant of concern, which in this scenario is bacteria, and then also trying to do an overall reduction in the overflow volume, which I believe it's somewhere around 85% is what that guideline set up. And then in 2020, there was a CSO law, Senate Bill 1064, that expedited the actual time frame associated with those control measures. And so that permit for the Virginia pollution elimination system got updated to reflect the new timeframes, which is the 2035 timeframe, which I'm going to be presenting on today. And ultimately, that resulted in an interim plan and a final plan on how we were going to address these items. This kind of goes over, how we've come to where we are today, just the number of investments. Now, just a note on this slide, it does inflate those costs to current dollars for 2024. So we didn't spend $420 million in 1970. Those are current day dollars. So you look at this, there was additional 50 million gallons of capacity built in the Shockover retention basin, some little improvements at the wastewater treatment plant. Then you had the Hampton-McCoy tunnel, and that added some additional capacity. And then most recently, you had the expansion for the wastewater treatment plant from 75 to 140. And when I say 75 to 140, we're talking about wet weather events, not normal capacity events. So we couldn't sustain a 140 year round. Those are during rain events and shortly thereafter. And then we also had some various improvements on some of the receiving streams and super separation projects. This kind of breaks down the time frame associated with the interim plan and final plan. The interim plan was due in July 1st, 2021. We met that requirement. And there was a requirement in there to initiate construction and related activities. We met that requirement as well. And then there is an additional requirement on there that we complete those construction activities by July 1st, 2027. And then for the final plan, same level of requirements. Plan was due July 1st, 2024. We met that requirement. And then there is a requirement to initiate construction activities by July 1st, 2025, and then an ultimate final completion deadline of July 1st, 2035. This slide kind of just shows you the level of reductions that are being occurring for the TMDL, the pollutant of concern, which is bacteria. And these are referenced in colony forming units. And so you can see here that the interim and final plan proposes, in essence, a 70% reduction, which is tremendous to get a cleaner waters in the James. So that's a real accolade to the city of Richmond once we are able to complete this. This slide actually goes over a little bit of our screening criteria and then what we did to evaluate and ultimately the selection criteria, and a couple other subsequent slides I show you which outfalls are actually being implemented in the interim plan and the final plan. So we went from identifying about 20 potential solutions to evaluating 18 to selecting 10 in the interim plan with a cost of 51 million. And the million gallons reduction is about 182 on an annual basis, which is a significant reduction. And then in the final plan, we went through and we had about 34 projects screened in, 20 evaluated, and we ultimately selected 4, and with a cost of 575 million. Many of you could probably recall the original estimate that we had, which was almost 1.2 billion. Going through and doing a cost-effective selection of these projects tremendously reduced the cost of the projects and ultimately the amount of money we needed to request from the General Assembly or potentially absorb it into our rate structure. So, and that is a approximate reduction of 774 million gallons on an annual day. And ultimately the cost is 626 million total. The final plan was approved by DEQ. We did this plan in close coordination with them, but also with some stakeholders. That process was very long. I think we had 2 to 3 members from each district that participated in that, giving their feedback on whichever project we were going to move forward. And then ultimately that tied into what I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides is the project schedule and then ultimately our decision. So the interim and final plans, these are the 10 projects that were on the interim plan, and then also the 4 that were selected for the final plan. You can see in here that we have some project projections of ultimately meeting that target deadline of July 1st, 2027. And for the final plans, there's 4 projects identified. It looks like, you know, we're still going to meet those goals of 2035. And this is a little contingent on us getting the funding that we're requesting from the General Assembly to aid in this endeavor. But we're also looking at ways that we can expedite this. Most recently in the proposed budget from the biennial from the state, you see that we got about 75 in FY25 and about 25 in FY26. We're seeing if we can expedite the Canoe Run Park storage tank project and move that up in the time frame a little bit to try to demonstrate that we are actively using the grant funds that are being provided so that when we go back and ask for more, because we ultimately are going to have to ask for more to ensure that we don't disproportionately increase our rates for the betterment of this project, that, you know, we demonstrate to the General Assembly and DEQ that we're actively pursuing, actively using these funds to increase the or decrease the schedule of implementation. This slide actually goes over and just shows you, look at the icons, one's for storage, one's for treatment, one's for separation. So storage is basically a basin that's going to be installed to capture all the flows so that when the rain event occurs, it flows into that tank, stored there, and then we pull it out. Treatment is doing like disinfection, high rate disinfection, discharging back, And then separation is separating both the combined sewer and the sanitary sewer so that the stormwater goes in one pipe and the sanitary sewer goes in another pipe that goes directly to the treatment work. But we have multiple projects. You can kind of see the color coordination in there. And the green ones are the interim plan and the orange ones are the final plan. This is a slide that we put up just to kind of demonstrate why we're requesting funds from the General Assembly and also how we rate compared to our regional partners or Commonwealth partners overall that have similar CSO projects underway. And if you look at the annual wastewater bill percentage of median household income, EPA sets that affordability threshold at 2%. So you can see where we fall on that as 1.5%, and some of these other utilities fall like 1.2, 0.8, 0.8. So as you get closer and closer to that 2%, you're getting to the point where your utility rates, your bills aren't affordable for the person that you're normally trying to provide service to. And so those plays into grant eligibility when there is a federal grant component or a state grant component. When they rank those programs that you apply for, if you have a project that's eligible, it puts you higher on that ranking list to try to reduce that burden that your ratepayers are having to bear. And again, when we overlay the census map and shows you how Richmond looks, this is where we look overall in Richmond based off the affordability of bills that are at that 2% or approaching that 2% or over that 2% threshold. And this kind of reiterates the importance of us actively pursuing those grants from the General Assembly, DEQ, to try to offset some of those costs. And in this slide, it goes over the funding time frame that we've requested for the General Assembly sessions from FY 2025, and ultimately what we will be requesting for FY 2028. We had requested an amendment in FY25 for the 50 to 150. Ultimately, that was what got changed to 75. And then we had requested the 150 and 26, which ultimately got 25. We're still going to actually pursue additional grant funding as years come up. So FY27, 28 budget, we're going to be asking for additional money. And we're also going to try to, like I mentioned earlier, demonstrate that we're able to not only schedule projects, but execute those projects, use those funds so they can see forward progression on the actual use of the funds that they are authorizing. With that, I'm going to pause for the CSO updates, and then I'll give an audit update. So if you guys have any questions on the CSO update, I'll be happy to answer those.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the presentation. I learn something new each time we go through the CSO updates, and especially grateful for the work done to find some more affordable options for these measures, because the state has, left us a little bit nervous here about where the money's going to come from, and having to go back every year with hat in hand is a difficult position to be in. I will absolutely open up questions to my colleagues here, but I guess I would just ask, we haven't seen the mayor's budget yet, but are you anticipating a budget increase not a budget increase, are you anticipating a rate increase?
So not a rate increase anticipated as it relates to the CSO component. We're actually trying to pursue those grants, and the projects that we have on the table haven't used the portion of the funds that have been allocated to us from the General Assembly already, either through ARPA or through the matching fund.
Okay.
So that rate increase that we're proposing in the budget is for all the inflationary increases, personnel increases, chemical cost increases. It has nothing to do with the CSO.
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat that? That was just for me, it's a little bit hard to distinguish what you were saying.
Yeah, so it would be attuned to like inflationary increases for material costs, chemical cost changes,
Okay.
Personnel cost increases, things of that nature. When we go through and develop our rate model, we put all those inputs in, and it asks us to, as long as we're adhering to our financial policies, this is the anticipated rate increase we would need to satiate ourselves in the upcoming year. Now, those items in and of themselves don't incorporate a CSO related project. When we get to the point where we start pulling the trigger and doing these construction projects as they're mandated, so going and doing the bids for construction, that's when we need the funds from the General Assembly, so we don't have an impact to the ratepayers.
Mhm.
In the event that we did not get the funds, let's say in FY27, they don't allocate us additional funds, we'd have to make a decision on how we would fund those projects. And during that year, we would make a determination on if the rates could absorb that increase, or do we need to request additional extension per se on the requirements? So instead of going to 2035, we might go back to the General Assembly and ask them, since they did not provide the financial component to the projects that are mandated, could we get an extension on the time frame? So we might move that, request an extension to like 2040 or somewhere along the lines, and then we would rerun the rate model to incorporate that increase in the projects that we have in the CIP, and then see what that would do to the rates at that point. But right now, the rates don't incorporate anything with the CSO.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, questions on CSO?
Sticking with the rate increase, knowing that we are at 1.5 of the EPA's wastewater bill affordability threshold, one, what happens if we do end up needing to increase our wastewater bill percentage? Like, is that 2% a hard ceiling?
That 2% is not a hard ceiling. That's based off of EPA's validation of what that threshold would be. There's no mandate that you can't increase rates more than it would be affordable from the 2% of the median household income. That's kind of a gauge saying that, at this point, the utility bill is becoming disproportionately a portion of that bill. So like you have increases in rent, you have increases in food. And so if you equate all those together, in generality, utilities should be less than 2%. And so you'll see as time progresses or things change, the ratio of those household commitments to what they have as their income changes over time. So rent may become a higher burden, food may become a higher burden, utility may become a less of a burden. But ultimately, we're trying to make sure that the utility bill stays close or below that 2%.
If these projects when these projects are completed, is there ever an anticipation of that rate going down when there's not this additional expense for the CSO?
So the CSO, as it stands right now, we have been doing past projects. That's why you see that investment in I'll go back to the slide. These are the past investments we've done in CSO. Some of those have been granted or had some federal or state funding to assist with those, but a large portion of this has been on the ratepayers to improve on the system. So that's why you're seeing a higher median household income ratio to date. Now, going forward, we've requested those funding from the federal or state government. And so those aren't incorporated into, I don't see a disproportional rate increasing unless we don't get that funding. And then we're going to have to reevaluate to see how that falls and if we need to reprioritize projects, ask for that extension. But I don't see that being, as long as we get the funding, it's not going to increase that rate.
But you're saying there's never a possibility of the rate going down.
Normally, there's not a rate going down. It may be it may shift based off the inflationary increase. So you might see a 2-3% rate increase, but I never see a point where you would actually have a negative portion where it starts to go into the negative. We would never reduce the rates because there's always, unless the economies change and there's some level of reduction in like cost per se. But I can't foresee that happening in the near future. No.
And then just another question. On page 11, where you lay out the CSO control methods, I'm assuming that storage is the most cost-effective method, with full separation being sort of the highest quality but most expensive.
Yeah, full separation usually will run the gamut of being a little bit more expensive. Volume or storage, it's highly dependent on the size of the storage. So if you can find a cost-effective volume, it can be less than the treatment, but sometimes those piggyback off each other.
So with regard to this map, knowing that there is major population shifts happening in South Richmond, and then seeing the control methods, the spread of the control methods. I mean, I know that they're all along the points of the river, but is there any anticipation that this may not protect us in future state as populations shift further south down 301?
So I guess your question is conditions change, because this is predicated off of both sanitary sewer going into the CSO, but also wet weather conditions. Sanitary represents a small fraction of that volume that goes into the CSOs. The high percentage of that is the rain, so it's almost 90% that would be rain events. So from a expansion perspective or change in residential use type discussions, I don't think there's an issue with the capacity. More of a concern would be modeling against increased rain events, additional volumes. We have done that preliminary volume modeling and also done some flow tests on our CSOs, making sure that our predictive model does equate to that. I think with a reasonable surety it does it, but to the point you're making, as things change and we have to continuously revise our modeling efforts, there might be additional efforts to if we see a higher portion of rain events going into one aspect of the CSO due to localized rain event, high precipitation per se, we might have to reassess in the future.
So there's would there be like a schedule of that reassessment?
We haven't yet determined what that would be. We're still trying to get all of them upgraded. But once we get those inputted, we are actively monitoring the flows from those CSO events. And that would be part of our annual review process where we would look at what these flows are. Do they match what we predicted would occur? Are we seeing some type of escalation? And if we start to see some level of escalation, either due to residential migration or through climate change per se, we would reassess and say, what additional programs do we need to implement? There's a lot of alternatives that can be implemented. Like I showed you on the previous slide, we went through 20, 34, 54 of these projects. We evaluated 18, 20. It's a total of 38 and 54 holistically. There's opportunities to go back to the drawing board if we need to expand where we need to. And we can shelf and pull those off the shelves as needed to try to see if we can enhance the program as warranted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have a few questions just to make sure that I'm clear on the timeline and the numbers primarily. My first question is, the interim plan, is that now fully funded?
That one is fully funded. It's about $50 million, so it's fully funded.
Thank you. And so on page 6, regarding the regulatory framework, the next milestone is to initiate construction and related activities for the final plan, and the deadline of that is July 1st, 2025. Are we in a position where we will meet that timeline?
We are, and when it says initiate construction and related activities, going in and selecting a design engineer and starting to do your designs would satiate that request. So we're well suited to do those.
Thank you. And on page 14, where it's kind of the overview of the budget, so the requested amount of $500 million, there's an appropriated amount for $100 million, but looking at the slide with the overall budget for the final plan, that is $575 million. So my question is, if you could provide or just to explain where all of the funding is coming from, in addition to the amount that we've requested. So how much do we have in the bank right now, and has it come from other sources, just for clarity?
Yeah, so a portion of that additional loan or grant, the $50 million, had a local match component. And so we've already put in that $50 million into the program in and of itself. And a portion of that has already been incorporated. I have to go back and pull, actually, I think I have it in one of my notes. Hold on one sec. Yeah, I think portion of that is actually expended up to, I want to say close to 90 million of that local match. Only 50% of, or 50 million of it counted towards that local match component. So there's almost another $40 million built into those CSO projects. To date, based off the amount appropriated, we've expended about $111 million, $11.5 million of that appropriation. So we're continuing moving forward with that, and hopefully with the additional appropriation that we're getting from this, the 75 and 25, that's actually going to go to the Canoe Run Park Storage Tank. I just moved back to the slides.
Mhm.
Originally, we had projected it being a little bit over $160 million project. By moving that up in the time frame and getting it sooner, we're going to try to expedite the design and build of that project and utilize that 100 million that we've gotten to date. That project looks like at a cost estimate now of like about 142. And so moving forward with that, that reduces the cost burden again. Now, this is all predicated off the General Assembly giving us that additional funding, but these are the opportunities we're trying to, decrease that cost burden and also the cost of the projects. So if they give us the money, then we can move faster, we can execute quicker, and the cost goes down. If it needs to take longer, you're going to have that inflationary pressure that goes for construction projects as time progresses, and the cost goes up. And so we're going to continue to advocate for the funding from the General Assembly with the premise that we're going to do our due diligence, make sure that everything is executed quickly. And if we can do that, we can reduce the cost burden, I think, significantly, as long as we execute timely and in an expeditious fashion.
Thank you. And so related to either the interim plan or the final plan, is the completion of these, does that also involve additional or changes in our operational costs?
So it depends on what you do. And so in this, there's always going to be a component of operational costs. So like when we do the shock retention basin high rate disinfection, it depends on the selection process, what's actually going to be incurred. There's always additional operating costs if you go to chemical treatment, UV treatment, all those have an additional operational cost. And then also, we're still evaluating things because there's always a better mechanism to do things. You always have to be willing to innovate and go through and reassess projects. So we are trying to identify additional projects, additional costs that could defer some of these additional expenditures. And some of those may have a treatment cost component to them if we go the route of treatment versus collection. Collection and separation, those are a larger portion related to the capital investment of those structures. And ultimately they get like a nice long life projection, hopefully 30, 50, 75 years. But in the event that you have to go back and replace those, that actual capital investment you're going to have to do for rehab replacement is kind of future year investment. And the operational cost kind of occurs on a routine basis for like the treatment options. So it's almost like trading capital costs for treatment costs if you select one over the other.
Yes. And so regarding obviously, being given a state mandate that's unfunded puts the city in a precarious position, although it's certainly a precarious situation to begin with. But I am wondering if, what are the consequences that are baked into for, if we don't have the money, what happens?
Right. And so the mandate is already adjusted in our, I'll go back to the 2025 or 2005 special order by consent. And so this is a consent order that was implemented by DEQ, and our permit requirements are associated with this. And so you become in a point where you're in non-compliance with your state permit. And then there's civil fines, penalties associated with non-compliance with those permits. So it's a little bit more complex. The actual equation comes in where you actually look at, the actual impact of that non-compliance, the willingness to not do what you're supposed to do, and then the day-to-day penalties associated with that non-compliance. So yeah, there would be potentially a civil penalty or a fine associated with that.
And final question, in my district, citywide, this is something that residents are very they care a lot about. What are some ways that residents can advocate and support this large project?
So advocating is best done by going through your delegates and senators, expressing the need for the project, both to meet the water quality of the James, which in my opinion is a state resource, not just a city of Richmond resource, and then expressing that there is a disproportionate impact to that ratepayer or the beautification of the James and the improvement of the James from a water quality perspective. And then we feel like the state representatives should support that and improve that natural resource for the entirety of the Commonwealth.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Director, for that CSO report. Always good to have the call to action to make sure that we are assisting you guys and fulfilling your mission and this work, which, as was noted, was a state mandate. Moving on to the second portion of your presentation, I believe we're going to dig into where you guys are on your audits.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So DPU has a large portion of the audits. And so I've outlined all the ones that have open recommendations here. And I've also outlined a couple of them that we recently think we've closed, and then that will be reflected in the next report. So under the wholesale water contract, that was audit number 2021 tax 08. The recommendation was that the Director of the Department of Public Utilities further research the billing variances and prior balances noted in the auditor's testing. And the status of this is the audit team has provided the specific details on the variance. We just recently requested that, I think a couple months ago, and we're currently reviewing. When I say currently reviewing, we anticipate to close out this within the next couple weeks.
Just for clarity, the wholesale water contracts, are those the contracts with our neighboring municipalities? Just a top level of,
yes.
Just to explain the context for that.
Yeah, wholesale water contracts are the contracts. There's 3 wholesale water contracts with Henrico, Chesterfield, and Hanover. And that's when we sell water wholesale to those regional partners. And so once we get those variances corrected and addressed onto OCA, I'm hoping to close that out probably within the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that should be closed at the next update, either in the audit committee or whenever I'm presenting again for you guys. And then continuous auditing. There was a comment regarding audit number 2022 TAC 12. We recommend that the Director of Public Utility ensure that all paid overtime noted within Rapids is adequately documented and approved. We did submit information to OCA to try to close this out because we thought we rectified it. Additional request was another sample and the most recent annual training and a violations tracking form. We're in the process right now of pulling that sample data and giving them the annual training and then also the tracking form. We have a subsequent meeting with them on April 11th that we're going to try to go over a lot of these open items. So you might see as I go through this, and I'm going to reference that April 11th meeting to hopefully close out a lot of items. And as we go through this, if you see a yellow block in the slides, that's indicative that we've submitted stuff to OCA. Either they've accepted it or they're reviewing it or they've asked for additional information. And a black box is just a priority audit. So just for general reference when we go through this. DPU contract compliance, and this is for our procurement contracts for our service providers that we utilize. Audit number 2023 tax 02. It recommended that DPU Director ensure that lateral valves are exercised during the hydrant inspection and observations are documented. We did do that in our next contract terms. We made sure that that was incorporated. An additional request from OCA was to provide the completed hydrant inspection form, which is a component of the verification process. We're in the process of providing that to them. And again, I hope that close that out by April 11th. Happy to report that this one is closed out. So this was a high priority one, and it was also for the contract compliance, and it was for the audit number 2023 tax 02 again. We recommend the DPU Director develop and implement process and procedures to properly administer the hydrant repairs and replacement to ensure the hydrants are put back in service in a timely manner. And they include a goal for hydrant repairs, replacement within utilities, and document any encountered delays. Again, for contract compliance, audit number 2023 tax 02. The comment we recommend that DPU Director establish and implement a payment process that includes a defined billing time frame for completed work and reconciliation process to ensure the billed quantities agreed to the inspector's pay sheets and contract rates prior to payment. We did submit the policy that we had developed, and there was an additional question for to look at the reconciliation process a little bit more in detail. We'll be going over that in the April 11th meeting as well. And this was DPU contract compliance again, 20023-02. The comment received was, we recommend that DPU director develop and implement a transition plan to retain knowledge during staff turnover. We did develop an implementation plan. The last thing is a memo outlining the plan. We submitted that information to them. We have not submitted the memo to them. We're still drafting that currently. I'm hoping to rectify that within the next week or two, and then we'll get it to OCA and then hopefully close out this audit as well. Again, for contract compliance, 2023-02, we recommend the DPU director develop and implement a plan to address the water distribution division's needs that are currently being fulfilled by the contractor. Again, we submitted kind of our tentative plan, but they still need the memo outlining the entirety of the plan. Again, hoping to do this in the next 1 to 2 weeks, and then that will be closed out hopefully by the April 11th timeframe. Again, DPU contract compliance, 2023-02. We recommend the DPU director automate the inspection documentation process and centralize the tracking for non-hydrant work. We did submit information to OCA. They have requested walking through the change and looking at the completed inspection forms. So I'm hoping that when we go through the April 11th timeframe, that we have the opportunity to walk them through that, and they can close out this recommendation as well.
I have a question actually going back to the prior audit, the contract compliance audit. Could you talk a little bit more about what the contractor services are and how much, what is the overall cost impact in terms of the size of this contract?
Good question. I don't have those off the very top of my head. I'd have to pull that from you and give it to you in a subsequent timeframe. I don't know the actual cost per year.
Can you just describe what these contracted services are?
Yeah, so this is a water distribution, and this is like when they do repairs, things of that nature. We have annual contractors that go in, and they may be repairing mains, they may be repairing valves, things of that nature, and there's line items associated with that procurement contract. But without going through and pulling up those annual reviews and giving you a summary, I don't think I could eloquently speak to the actual monetary value.
Thank you.
Director Morris, just since this was, I feel a little bit responsible since this was my genius idea. You don't have to go through all of the audit. If you just want to go through what is listed as high priority,
Sure,
I don't want to torture you by going through every single one of them. Although I do appreciate your commitment to transparency.
Completely want to be transparent.
Yeah, no, just having it in front of us and like going, this was the entire point of the exercise. So I really appreciate like just having the information. But if like just for high priority and for sake of time, I don't want to.
Yeah, and
I know you're a busy person.
Yeah, I don't want to suffer you guys either. So we will go through and I will focus in on the high
I could do
priority.
this all day.
This was DPU billing 2023-09. We recommend the director of the Department of Public Utilities establish a reconciliation process that includes bad debt accounts and that are returned to the city and collected accurately in its entirety. I give a status update here. We think this is potential to close. So OCA is reviewing this information, and I hope in the next update, this is going to be a closed item. But again, DPU has already reinstated the full collection process, which includes customer bill notifications, field disconnects, third-party collection efforts, and lien activities. Additionally, DPU has partnered with PromisePay, and that's a digital platform to help customers avoid disconnects by setting up a pay program to come back up whole to whatever they owe the utility. And this says is a little $10 down, but they set up the program anywhere from like a couple months, 12 months to 36 months. And it's based off of what the customer thinks is they can reasonably pay to move forward to kind of get them back in good graces with their utility bill, which we've seen much success in. Citywide warehouse audit and inventory management. This was at the DPU main warehouse, and this is phase 1. This was listed as a high priority. Audit number 2025-03. It says we recommend that DPU main warehouse program and operations supervisors develop and implement a process to ensure that the inventory is accurate and complete, including at a minimum a reconciliation of system quantities to physical on-hand quantities, capturing material costs where appropriate, and updating inventory locations as needed. And I put this as in review by DPU, but I believe we already developed the policy, and that's been submitted to OCA. I think they had a couple ancillary questions that needed clarification, and then we're probably going to be refining that policy a little bit to address their concerns. But again, I'm hoping this is probably going to be closed out within the next several weeks or month.
Dr. Morris, with this audit finding and the subsequent audit finding in terms of warehousing and inventory management, is it in your plans to create sort of an inventory software in the near future that can, besides like, because I know you talked about the policy, but is there like systems that are going to be put into place?
So there are systems existing that manage the inventory. I think in this issue, there's a reconciliation between the inventory count and the ones that were actually on the shelves, and a process in place to remove antiquated or outdated equipment from that, or surplus from that inventory, and then also set up a order quantity threshold. So like if you drop below like 10 and you need 5 additional, you would order 5 when you cross that threshold. Those all will be incorporated into a policy, but the actual system in itself for the main warehouse, it does exist. There is also, when we go in a future audit for the phase 2, it actually goes over the secondary warehouse. It's our wastewater treatment plant. They also have a main saver inventory management system that can be utilized as well. We just reached out to that manufacturer or vendor and verified that we could potentially incorporate those inventory counts into the system as well.
And then there was a part of this, I think, that was just sort of about like the state of the warehouses, like the physical state and sort of chaos and the inability to know what there is because things are just everywhere. Is there a progress report on that piece of it?
Yeah, so as I go through, a lot of these aren't high priorities or medium or low priorities, but it goes through, we're developing policies and procedures both to kind of rectify the state of operations, how you access the inventories, where you put the bins, like per se, like can you reference like a little bit of a chaos, right? So you go in, where do I find this particular material? It's not in the inventory. It's not a stock item. Like how do I actually track that? So in a couple of these other recommendations, it goes in the detail of, those non-stock items that should be stock items. We're incorporating those into the inventory. We're developing policies on, how you pull both from the warehouse, but also a storage room, because some of those are maintained in containment items. It's not in the main warehouse, but it might be in a bin somewhere else. And so how do you manage those, how you rectify the inventory accounts, and how you order against those, because you want to make sure that your main inventory system is reflective of both what's in the main warehouse, but also is reflected in those satellite locations as well. So all that's going to be developed in the policy.
Great, thank you.
Citywide warehouse inventory management, same audit threshold, 2025-03. We recommend the DPU main warehouse program and operations supervisors to development and process ensure materials applied directly to the job sites are immediately requisitioned and issued out of the inventory system. This goes back to what you just referenced, making sure that you maintain an active inventory and that you have the policies in place to do that. We have developed the policy. We're in the process of submitting that to OCA, and we're hoping that, again, once we finalize this, it will be closed out. Same audit 2025 text 03. We recommend that DPU main warehouse program and operations supervisors develop, document, implement an inventory count process. And this goes back to what I just talked about, where we assess inventory items, count them, and then have the frequency of the accounts. So again, we have established a policy and procedure. The additional request from OCA was to review what that established schedule for the count process was. I'm hoping in April 11th meeting that we're able to get to that. We have a lot of items to go over in that meeting, so I'm hoping we can get to the finality of it. I find it much more cost effective and effective of meeting times to talk through items instead of sending emails back and forth, because we've been trying to close out through the email process, and sometimes there's difficulty in doing that. So I'm hoping with high regard that the April 11th meeting will close out a vast majority of these comments and recommendations. This is another audit for the warehouse, high priority, and it was closed. And this was the demolition of that building 20. So that's gone. So that's closed down. That the whole building is gone. It's been replaced with, in essence, shipping containers that have inventories in them with locks, so that you know where everything is in those particular inventories. But there's no safety concern with the staff. And this is a high priority, but it's a phase 2. And we recommend that DPU Senior Director establish a process to define, document, and communicate what items should be classified as stock and non-stock items at the wastewater treatment plant. This speaks to what I just spoke about when I was doing a summary update. We are going through that process right now. We've identified several items that need to be included and updated into the inventory system. We're hoping to close that out within several months or several weeks, almost the end of the month. And I don't know if it's going to be on the next update, but it should be either on the next one or the one thereafter. And again, this is a phase 2, and this is to ensure that all items are tracked in the work order management system, and include the quantity and materials used, asset being serviced is now the way it's noted on the work order. So we have set up policies and procedures for this to ensure that those are tracked. We are working with staff in change management to make sure that they actually do that. That is a challenge because people are creatures of habit and they like to do things the old way. But as we progress through this, we hope to improve on that, and then we can attest to the implementation of that process. And this goes back to the same discussion. A little bit of these high priority items for the phase 2 audit are kind of predicated off of our phase 1 response. So we've developed a lot of policies and procedures in our phase 1, and we're hoping to close those out and then incorporate those additional findings into the phase 2 and close those out immediately. And this is one of them as well. So we're going to kind of predicate some of the policy updates we did for the phase 1 audit into this item as well. And this was a recommendation that the wastewater treatment plant warehouse develop and document and the form inventory count process. Same thing as the previous one for the warehouse 1. And this one was, we recommend the warehouse material supervisor development process to minimum maximal reordering quantities. This is the same as the policies for the previous warehouse. And as soon as we close that out, we'll produce this policy for the second warehouse as well. This is a different item. This was related to, we recommend that DPU address the formal process for user access for the main saver. Main saver is that inventory management system that utilized at the second warehouse I spoke to earlier. And ultimately, we have gone through and reviewed this. We have produced a draft policy. We're in the process of finalizing that. As soon as we do, we'll implement. But ultimately, this is in essence assigning those user responsibilities as somebody gets hired or they move from job duties. So we make sure that only the people that minimally require access to the warehouse have access to the warehouse inventory. And I believe that's all the priority items.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And obviously we have some, other reports that you guys are responding to and continue to work through. I think we didn't ask for an update on the EPA or VHB, but I think at a future meeting, it'd be nice to hear how DPU is doing to respond to those. I would say, one thing I think we would have the opportunity to, in this discussion, is just let us know any staff or hiring changes you've made that are helping you facilitate these audit improvements. And then I'll open it up to my colleagues. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Actually, I just hired somebody on this week. I don't know, Lee, if you want to come up here real quick. So Lee, it came from the Department of Environmental Quality as the enforcement director. He is now standing up our water compliance section for DPU. He's going through and looking at all the outstanding EPA reports, all the outstanding VDH, all DEQ, all the internal audit items that we have outstanding, and then just general looking at our statutes and regulations and requirements, making sure that we're adhering to those and we develop efficient policies to implement those going forward. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lee just to give you a general update on his background, if you're okay with that.
That would be welcome. Thank you. And is this the same thing as a controller, or is this a different role?
It's different than a controller. Yeah. So it's a regulatory compliance role versus a controller. Controller is usually focused around the financials.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have a controller in DPU?
We do. It's equivalent, but we do have a controller. Yeah.
Okay. Is that a new hire or have we had that?
That's not a new hire. That's an existing.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Scott said I came from most recently at Department of Environmental Quality. I come to the city of Richmond with 20 years of legal experience in both the environmental law and administrative law field at both the federal and state level. I matriculated at Vermont Law School, where I got my JD, as well as a master's in science and environmental policy. So
Thank you so much. We're glad to have you here.
thank you very much.
Colleagues, any questions for this presentation, either the CSO portion or the audits?
I just want to say, Director Morris, thank you very, very much for the thoroughness of the audit status update. Truly, like, this is, I hope that it was taken in the intention that it was sort of ideated, which is that by being able to share this on a regular basis and with us and therefore the public, we're continuing to rebuild the trust from January 6th. So thank you, because I think this does really achieve that in some regard.
We took that in the vein it was intended. This is a process for process improvement, and we want to make sure that we're doing that, and then we're transparent with the government and the citizens of what we're doing. So I appreciate that.
Councilwoman Gibson? Okay, great. Thank you so much. And again, welcome to the team. All right, moving on to presentation 3, we have an update from Human Resources on the 2024 vacancy and overtime reports. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Robin Redmond, and I am with the Human Resources Department. I am the Deputy Director Senior in the Human Resources Department. We will briefly go through staffing and vacancy, and then move on to tuition. Not tuition, sorry. Oh. All right, then moving to employee turnover and separation, and then we'll spend some time on overtime and the 50% threshold. All right, so for staffing and vacancy, we have a current 15.5 overall vacancy rate as of second quarter fiscal year 25, and that is down from 16% at the end of fiscal year 24. As a kind of highlight here, we've got 26 departments that currently have fewer than 12 vacancies. Of those departments, there are 2 that make up about 50% of our vacancies. The human recruiting, and we have 23 police recruits that just recently graduated and will move into sworn service. This slide is going to show departments or groups that have more than 10 vacant positions. So as I was saying, we have a couple of departments that are making up about half of our total vacancies. So you will see the column that is the funded and vacant columns, I'll say this first, are as of a certain point in time. So 12/31 and 6/30. The vacancy percentage is basically an accumulation of the year. So if you go through that, we have 4,383 funded positions. We have 651 vacant, and that is 103 more positions from fiscal year 24. And we have filled 8 of those positions since the end of fiscal year 24. If we go through some of these departments, DPU is got a significant number of vacancies. That is, as you know, under new management, they are reassessing and reevaluating these vacant positions and what needs to be filled. Vacancies sometimes are not just straight up vacancies. They can be filled by temporaries. Sometimes that work gets absorbed by folks who work overtime. So there's a variety of ways that things get done. And police sworn has 144. As we just said, that 23 of those are going to now be filled by new graduates from our recruit class. Police sworn is not as easy as let's put out an ad and 2 weeks later somebody's on the police force, right? So there's a drive to get a group of folks in. Then you've got the recruit class, and then you have the graduation of the recruit class. So they are recruiting, and they just finished their last class. These other departments are much smaller numbers. Parks and Rec, they have been a little bit on a freeze with hiring positions. They are requesting again to get those filled. Some of these other positions, but Public Works is similar in looking for positions, but going around other directions to get the job done. Finance has had some turnover in their positions. They are steadily looking, but they are in the middle of their tax season now, so they will do another drive once they get a chance to pull together a recruit group that they can train and pull into how to do this work. The rest of them are really pretty small. If I flip to the next screen, these are even smaller. So this is about 26 departments and groups that really only have between 7 and 0 actual vacancies. All right, switching to turnover. We're pretty proud of this turnover chart. We have gone from 15.7% turnover in fiscal year 22. As of second quarter, fiscal year 25, we are looking at a turnover rate of 9.2%. There has been quite a lot of work in this area. Some strong efforts made over the years and during this period to enhance pay, enhance benefits, make this a more appealing place that folks will want to come and be employed here. We've, gone through the VRS and added that. We've had some good increases in wages for our folks. We've done some market studies. We've went through employee engagement sessions to hear from employees, what do you want? What bothers you? What can we do better? We've added a clinic. We've, just multiple enhancements here. And I think all these things are paying off. Now, I will say the 15.7 came off of COVID. And we had something that nationally became called the Great Recession. So that is a very high percent. But rolling from 15.7 to making our way to 9.2 is quite an accomplishment, and we are really proud of our departments for working there. This is a different look. It's called a separation rate. The difference between this slide and the previous one is this one will eliminate retirements and deaths. And in every case, you'll see 2 or 3 points of a difference here. So where the 12.4 is where we had the 15.7 turnover. And where you see the 7.4 is where we had the 9.2 turnover. So just a different perspective of the same sort of calculation. This is going into the turnover rate by the departments. Now, this is our projection of the full year for the turnover rate. At the top of this, well, before I talk about this, let me talk about how a small department, and as I know you know, a percentage is a whole different animal when you have a smaller department. So if I have, for example, 12 employees in my department, and 3 of them have left so far this year, we are going to estimate that your second half looks like your first half, so you're going to have 6. And 6 out of 12 is going to give you a 50% turnover rate. If I lost those same 3 people in DPU, I'd still be at 0. So even though the percentages look high, you have to look at that with the size of the group. Finance is got about 100 employees at the end of fiscal year, second quarter fiscal year. And the percentage there is reflective of some turnover that they had. Some of this turnover, some of this turnover is for reasons that were not a good fit. Either the employee has resigned or the city helped them along to realize they weren't a good fit and have done some things in that direction as well. So there's really not much of a concern considering these are smaller. Emergency communications tends to have higher turnover as a rate, as does justice services. Both of those, I think part of it is when you pull in a new person to a job like that, sometimes it's hard to know what you're into until you get in there. And, you know, folks may think this is what I want to do. They get in there and there's a lot of high stress, a lot of alertment, and you know, this is just not what I thought it was going to be. So I think we see some more turnover in there. They're a little bit more difficult to recruit. Emergency communications, again, usually likes to hire in a group and run them through training. So that does delay things a little bit for hiring. And then also once they start in the job, they may leave a little quicker. This is the same thing here as the previous slide. The difference here is these are the departments that had less than 15%, and actually the highest percent here is 12.7. So these folks are very adequate with what their turnover rate is and within line with the 9.2 average that we have overall. Some of your larger departments are in here. Again, it takes a lot more to move that percentage of turnover when you're in a bigger department. Okay, so let's talk about overtime. The things we're going to eventually get to are 2 main areas. So our 23 overtime versus our 24 overtime, we saw a reduction of 39,180 hours in overtime. That's a 7% decrease. And we're also going to talk about what happened in January of 2025. Before we go into that and jump into some of these details, I think it's important to stop and actually show how we are computing and what this 50% threshold is. The 50% threshold refers to the overtime hours that are 50% above what a standard regular non-overtime hours are. So, for example, if we measured this by the week, a 40-hour employee would be at 50% if they had more than 20 hours of overtime in that week. Now, we don't measure it by the week, but we do go through this by the month and by the year. So that's what that computation means. We also, in the month of January, well, I'll start. There are 2 months in the 12-month period that has 3 paydays in it because we pay 26 times in a year. So 10 months will have 2 paydays in it. 10 months will have 2 paydays. 2 months will actually have 3 paydays. And it just so happens that January was one of those 3 payday months. And by that, when I say days, it means that we're going to have, an employee with 40 hours. You got 4 weeks. That's 160 hours for regular pay. 50% turns that into a threshold of 80 hours. So anything over 80 hours, we're going to, move around in our reporting process. The 3 paydays is going to be a threshold of 120 hours for that same 40-hour employee. We are using the same as the W-2 calendar cycle to measure our year. So by doing that, what that means is that we can keep up with it in our payroll system. It can be tracked easier, pulled out of the system, and even an employee would be able to track that by their own pay stubs. So this is what the 50% threshold measurement is using. So overtime, again, I said it's calculated monthly, but we do a year-to-date computation. And because there are seasonal occurrences that make overtime different in different months, we focus in on this annual amount. So the winter storms and the clearing the snow and the burst water pipes, they are more likely to occur in January. They're not going to occur in the summertime. Grass cutting, for example, that's going to be in the summer, but you're never going to have that in January. But January may be heavy overtime because of the cold weather and the consequences of the snow and the freezing. A mayor's declaration of an emergency will cause 1.5 times pay for those who are required to work during the state of an emergency. If there are any unusual or unexpected or occasional events that happen, that's going to trigger some overtime. Additionally, employees who take holidays and other types of leave, especially in these 24/7, 365 agencies, that's going to cause overtime because they have to have minimum staffing, and when somebody wants to go out, somebody else has got to come in to make sure you maintain that minimum staffing. Being short-staffed, which is the vacant positions, that's going to cause overtime. And then any key projects that, especially ones under deadline, can cause overtime. Now, on a monthly basis, HR is pulling reports out of the system, and we are sending the month's report of the overtime calculation as well as a year-to-date computation, and that's being sent by HR to each department head. As you know, monthly reports are also sent to City Council as well as the CAO. And department heads are expected to report if they are expecting to exceed that 50% threshold on an annual basis. So back to January. We had the 6 weeks of pay. We had a few winter storms, one of them triggering a declaration of emergency, which pulled out 1.5 times pay for those who needed to work. That declaration of an emergency started Sunday at 2:00, and this pay went into effect till Thursday that same week at midnight. Because we're using the calendar W-2 payday, we had days that went back into December, which meant we had 5 holidays that occurred in that month of January. And then, there were other events that happened in January that required fire and or police mostly to assist with those events. This is showing where we are right now, February year-to-date 2025, of who is exceeding that 50% threshold. So you will see the total head count of the department, and you'll see the total overtime hours worked by that department, and then the count of employees who exceeded that threshold by 50%. Police is at 21, fire at 16, emergency communications has 3, DPU 2, public works is 1, and social services had 1. Now, out of this list of 44 employees, 33 of them are 80 hours or less, which means in 1 month of time, if they did not do any more overtime, they would be back in compliance and below that 50%. The other 11, which are between police and fire, would require about 1.5 to 3.5 months of no overtime at all in order to be back to the year-to-date compliance. But that's a long way of saying it is possible that these folks will get below the 50% threshold as we move through the year. Now, looking at calendar 24 versus 2023, at the end of calendar 24, we had 13 employees who went over that 50% threshold. That compares to 2023, where we had 29. So about a little bit more than half of a decrease there. The hours that the groups went over the 50% threshold, we are looking at 1,593 versus 9,327, about an 83% drop. Okay, this is showing each department and the amount of the overtime in both 23 and 24, and the decrease of hours that they have had in overtime. So as you come down this list, you'll hit that first subtotal. So those folks who decreased, we saw a 9% decrease to 46,000, almost 47,000. We did have some departments that increased their hours by another 7,800. So overall, that's where we're getting to that reduction of 39,180 hours with the 7% decrease. The second slide is the departments that increased their hours. The increases are not much at all. By department, we have some very small numbers in here. The finance and social services are probably the two biggest numbers on here. And again, a lot of that is doing with, maintaining or catching up backlog of items to make sure that we are in compliance or serving our customers. And that is the end of my report. Any questions?
Thank you so much for taking us through this journey. And if I was just going to go to slide 15 for a second. So the department is exceeding the 50% threshold in 2025 year to date. So that summary of number of employees is 44.
That is correct.
Okay, and versus the year prior was 13, and then 2023 was 29.
Right, at the end of the year for the whole, this is for 2 months of activity. That was for 12 months of activity.
Right. So I just want to make sure, I mean, that's a very large number, and we haven't even had the full year yet.
That is correct, but each month is going to drop in that extra
Okay,
80
so
hours, and the idea is over the month that these folks will come into compliance, which means they will not be working the hours that they worked, particularly in January, which was what we are just calling perfect storm of everything came together and made it high.
okay, so this is not my field, but when we were looking back at the end of 2025, are you suggesting then the number will be less than 44?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
interesting. All right.
Yes, we're hoping, I mean, that game plan for us is 0. Now, whether we will hit that or not, we will see. There may be some issues that come up during the rest of the year that get us there. The departments are aware that the mission is 0.
Mm-hmm. And then, all right, well, let me pause for a moment and see if my colleagues have questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Just a few. Okay, in terms of, I'm going to go to one. I think it's just not worth really diving into police or fire, given everything we know about the context of that. So I'm going to kind of skip over those. But in terms of the other agencies, particularly those that have had high turnover rates in the last, since the beginning of 2024, what is the city doing in terms of, are there consistent exit interviews happening? Having managed people for almost 2 decades, when there are high turnover rates, that sometimes is indicative of culture, climate, management. So what are some of the strategies that are happening in terms of trying to find out what's going on?
Yeah. So we do have exit interviews. Part of the issue is getting people to do an exit interview, but we do have an exit interview that can be done online as well as in person. They can come in and talk about those things. Anything that looks like it is something that could be fixed in a department, we are reporting to the department head, and anything that sounds a little bit like something strange is going on in that department, we will get our employee relations team to look into that sort of thing to see if there's something going on in there. There's also, some training that can happen here with a higher turnover rate. I will say most of these departments are, because they're smaller, it's not terribly outrageous. And then you've got to remember we're projecting the year. So I know that these folks are intending to have these turnover rates come down.
Okay, so just to be clear, is there a consistent exit interview that is offered to all
there is
departing employees?
There
okay,
is.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of the overtime, I know that our friends at the Richmonder did a piece recently on overtime, and it, again, not indicative of the department, but some of this math doesn't math for me. Because some of this, somebody would have to be working basically 16.5 hours a day for 30 days straight in order to log some of these numbers. What is the departmental or the citywide approach to validating overtime? And at what point are we going to say we can't do this? Now, again, police and fire, I know that there are a lot of this. They're not all of it. And I guess I'm wondering, how do we as a city determine what the cost of really investing in recruitment and retention is versus, plugging the dike with this overtime. And also, I mean, I know the fire department talked about how this is really hard on, I mean, these are physically demanding jobs. So this has got to be like
Right. And
playing into all of it.
right. Fire, I will say, they can get there with that overtime pretty quickly because they have 24-hour shifts that they do. So they actually sleep there at the firehouse. So somebody who volunteers to pick up another day could pick up 24 hours. So that does make it add up very quickly on that side. But yes, part of this, our former CAO sent out a memo to our department heads, saying, look, these folks really should not be, for health and safety reasons. It's just risky that they are working these many hours. So we have had a lot of emphasis in management with the department heads to do a fair way of allocating these hours, make sure that they're distributed. There is generally a volunteer list where folks will just volunteer to do this overtime. If we have too much overtime out of that group, they can go into mandatory and find folks who don't necessarily sign up. But they will go through that list of volunteers to see who it is. Overtime is a strange thing in that some people absolutely want nothing to do with it, and the next one will take every minute of every day you can give to them. So, rather than force on a mandatory, they go through this voluntary list. But once they hit these levels, then there is a mission through the departments to have them take a break.
Just to reinforce, was there any piece of this that is validation or sort of auditing of these overtime hours and making sure that
they are exactly what we're paying. So they're coming out of our payroll system under a category called overtime. So we are absolutely paying this overtime and doing these hours. So there's no real question about that. It's pulling straight out of the system. Now, if you want to talk about fraud or abuse or something in that nature, folks will fill out their time card. Generally, the way this works, they will fill out their time card. Their supervisor approves that time card. Then it runs through the management and into payroll, and that overtime gets paid. So there are places in there that, if a supervisor's not paying attention, for example, that if you're talking about auditing, but there are processes in there to not have something that is abusive of putting in hours that didn't really happen, if that's where you're going.
Councilmember Gibson, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I think that this is a critical report to be looking at when it comes to government operations. We are the people that are doing the work for residents every day. And I think that vacancy and turnover cost us a lot as a city. Services don't get done. We pay more for overtime. Expertise is lost. We end up having to pay more by outsourcing services. And when it comes to emergency communications and these types of services, it can cost lives, so this is really very critical to be looking at, and I appreciate the report. I wanted to highlight one thing, because you talked a bit about some of the improvements that we've seen in both turnover and the vacancies. But there's one thing I think that's really critical to highlight, which is that as a city, we began collective bargaining in July of 2022. And in July of 2022, the turnover rate is noted at 15.7%. And today that's down to 9.2%. So it's really important over the next several, months, we'll be talking about increases in staff costs as it pertains to collective bargaining. But collective bargaining, without a doubt, is saving taxpayers money.
Yes, the ordinance went in 2022, and our first three collective bargaining units went in July of 2024. But I'm sure absolutely of one thing, that having a voice is really important to our employees.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.
So this is exciting. But I do think, residents, they're frustrated with the delivery of many services. And I think that, when we see high levels of vacancy, when we see high amounts of turnover, when we see a lot of overtime, ultimately, this is really a reflection of some level of dysfunction, you know? And so, I would be remiss, I think, not to point out that some of the departments where we were seeing particularly high turnover, finance, even DPU, unfortunately, these are departments that have had headlines in the paper because of significant issues in the delivery of services. And so, I would encourage this body to work in partnership with these departments to figure out what's driving these issues, because it's costing the city quite a bit.
Yes, absolutely.
I wanted to note too, as it pertains to overtime, so I received the report. I saw the first report in January, and definitely the numbers are high. And I understand that the way that time is calculated, that it can impact that. But I will say, when I opened the report, what I was looking for was particularly, I was interested in DPU. The city has said we've spent $5 million in addressing the water crisis, and I'm still trying to understand, where that money is going. And I frankly expected to see very high numbers in terms of number of staff in DPU overtime. And the number is actually not, it's like 2. I mean, in this report, but it was lower than I expected it to be. But what I do think, and I think we should have subsequent meetings to talk about this topic, is just how critical it is we figure this overtime issue out. Because as Councilwoman Abenbacher mentioned, I mean, safety is a critical concern. From our employees' standpoint, from one month to the next, you have very little financial stability. I mean, it can get to where your employee is relying on that level of overtime in order to pay their bills, and it's something you can't rely on. And so, if we've set up a system where folks have an expectation for overtime, and then all of a sudden the system becomes functional again, I mean, there are issues that come with that. And I am very sensitive to providing our employees with stability. That's important. When our employees have stability, then our residents have that too. The other piece that I think it's important to recognize is that the distribution of overtime has some level of subjectivity to it that can encourage a certain level of favoritism.
That is correct.
And so, because of all of those things, I think this is something we really need to figure out. And I would encourage your department, and I'm open to, policy recommendations, that when overtime is distributed, is if there's a way that we can ensure that that there are systems in place to try to ensure that there's less potential for favoritism, and that it can be evened out so that you don't have a month where one employee's I mean, $20,000, this is a lot of money. So, I just really think that this is probably one of the most critical things that we look at.
Yes, the decrease in the turnover rate is obviously a step in the right direction because, as we all know, new trainees may take twice as long to do something as a person who's been here for 5 years. It's just the nature of the beast. So reducing that turnover is very critical to that. Hiring the positions that are there and finding candidates that are good quality, high fit, good fit with the city and able to contribute quickly. So, having the right pay structure is also important to attract those folks to come to the city. So we are working on all those pieces individually one at a time and trying to make sure that these things happen. The exit interviews are there. We are doing quite a bit to try to, make sure those things happen. We can work a little harder with the recruitment side and making sure that, we're very clear with folks what this job is going to entail, what it's about. First interviews can be first interviews, but a second one can be, okay, here's what you're in for. This is what's going to happen, and this is, what we need you to do, and set those expectations. So we have that. We also do need to, if they are not a good fit, move fairly rapidly to get a good fit. So all those things are on our list and things that we are working on, and we will get with departments to make sure that everybody's on the same marching order.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Ms. Redmond, thank you so much. I really appreciate the presentation as well as coming down here and giving us, sort of the zoom out so we can understand, the background information as you dive into the details and the numbers and how they came to be. This was a terrific presentation. Again, thank you for your work. And we may circle back to this, I'm sure, as we continue to try and make progress on it. But thank you for coming down.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate being able to chat with you guys today.
Thank you. All right. While we pull up our fourth presentation, I just want to let folks know that I have a hard stop at 3. So Vice President Abu Bakr is going to be taking Thank you. Hello, Ms. Warden. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity for our office, the Office of Sustainability, to present some proposed, I'll give it a second, the waste reduction policies, strategies to reduce our landfill waste. My name is Tara Warden. Today I'll be discussing 3 key initiatives. A proposed disposable plastic bag tax, the implementation of the statewide polystyrene ban for food vendors, the implementation of the statewide balloon release ban, and I'll also cover 2 administrative updates targeting waste reduction within our city operations. Our overarching goal is ambitious but necessary to reduce Richmond's overall landfill waste by 25% by 2030, while advancing environmental justice and creating economic benefits for all residents. Before diving into some specifics, I'm going to provide you some important context. In 2020, the Commonwealth passed legislation enabling localities to adopt a 5-cent tax on disposable plastic bags. And in 2021, Virginia imposed a statewide ban on intentional balloon releases. And most recently, the General Assembly and the governor approved enforcement of a polystyrene ban for food vendors beginning in July this year.
And then I don't see it on this slide, but I feel like I have heard circulated that we are looking at the landfill filling up in the near future. What is that expected date?
That's a great question. Laura, you were just mentioning this in a meeting.
I feel like it's an important grounding fact as we look to extend the life of that landfill.
Yes, excellent question. Thank you very much. Laura Thomas, Director of the Office of Sustainability. Regionally, there is a landfill concern about the time period of which these are going to fill up. There are several ongoing conversations with CVWMA and leadership from across the counties in the region. We anticipate that the region will run out of landfill space in 20 years. It takes 10 years to establish a new landfill. And so you think about the fact that there's a 10-year window for all of the local jurisdictions to agree upon, decide, implement, and stand up a new landfill. 10 years is actually a tight time frame. So it's really important for us to make sure that we're mitigating the contribution of our community to that problem.
Absolutely. I mean, there are many reasons we want to tackle this. I just want to make sure that one was on the list. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for providing that context, Director Thomas. Okay, so it's worth noting that these initiatives weren't created in isolation. They represent priorities that were identified by our community and approved by City Council through various planning efforts. Richmond 300 in 2017 identified the need for the enabling state legislation for all three of these initiatives. The Council's 2021 climate emergency resolution outlined the plastic bag tax. And our guiding document, RVA Green 2050, has also identified these strategies as key to our waste reduction goals. And before discussing specific initiatives, I want to highlight why this work is so urgent. Single-use plastics have a devastating impact both on our environment and on our city infrastructure. Plastic waste is a significant contributor to drain blockages throughout the city. These materials break down into microplastics that then enter the James River and the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And DPU regularly observes how plastic waste clogs stormwater infrastructure during heavy rain events. These impacts disproportionately affect lower income communities, making it not just an environmental issue, but also an equity issue. These strategies I'm presenting directly address these challenges. So let's start with the plastic bag tax. Richmond wouldn't be alone in this effort. 10 other Virginia localities have already adopted a similar measure. And based on our peer city analysis, the average annual tax burden on residents would be approximately $2.12 on an annual basis. The tax would generally apply to disposable plastic bags provided at grocery stores, pharmacies, and convenience stores. And this tax would apply regardless of whether the consumer pays it or the stores provide the plastic bags for free. And revenue generated would be restricted to environmental cleanups, environmental recycling, and education programs, and providing reusable bags to recipients of SNAP and WIC. The draft ordinance proposes a 3-2 revenue split between the city and retailers for the first year, and then all subsequent years, a 4-1 revenue split. And based on other localities, we project the annual revenue to be around $400,000 on an annual basis. For implementation, we've developed a thoughtful timeline. This item is meant to be introduced to Council on the April 28th agenda for a July implementation timeline. Those first 6 months of the implementation will be dedicated to concerted business outreach with our partners in the Department of Economic Development, which will include in-person visits, email blasts, et cetera. And then concurrent with that timeline, we will conduct community outreach with bag giveaways targeting frontline communities with high participation in WIC and SNAP. The tax implementation would start January 2026. So this should allow us for some sufficient time for education, outreach, and preparation by our business community. For the statewide polystyrene ban affects all food vendors. This follows a 2-phase implementation. And again, this is just an local enforcement of the statewide ban. It starts in July this year, and it applies to all large food vendors with 20 or more locations in the state. The following July 2026, will apply to all food vendors. And so our local implementation strategy would focus on education and enforcement coordination. The business outreach to food vendors would be, again, in partnership with our Economic Development Department. And enforcement will be managed by the state with support from our citywide code enforcement team, who will provide ongoing compliance reminders to our restaurant community. The balloon release ban, again, has been in effect since 2021. So our office is managing communications and education around this ban. We would plan to conduct targeted outreach to balloon vendors and provide educational signage to display at point of sale locations to help inform customers about the prohibition of the balloon releases. Finally, we've identified these 2 internal strategies to reduce waste in city operations. The first is a single-use plastics reduction administrative regulation, and we launched this work last fall as an internal program. And we've been targeting the purchasing power of departmental personnel and encouraging them switching from plastics to paper, compostable, or reusable alternatives. The next step is drafting an administrative regulation that would prohibit the purchase of single-use plastics for city purposes. The second administrative update, or really just administrative work that needs to be done, is the special event permit update. Currently, city events, they are provided waste receptacles at no cost. There is new life breathed into this effort to provide both recycling receptacles and composting receptacles and what we're branding as eco-waste stations for all city permitted events. This is going to take some time to scale up. There's some significant operational challenges that we're seeing, but we will provide educational resources as part of this program to event organizers for how-to guides on how to host low waste or zero waste events, and also resource guides for vendors that are hosted as part of the event. Again, yeah, implementation will begin in July with smaller events and then ramp up with the larger events. Together, these initiatives form a comprehensive approach to waste reduction across the city. And by combining our policy changes, education, and administrative updates, we hope to make a meaningful progress towards our 25% waste reduction goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know it's something that's been in the works for a long time, and I appreciate seeing the other localities that have already managed this. You notice it when you go to places that have this in place. You really can see it, and it is not that much of an imposition. It just is not for the for what you see downstream as the positive effects for health. I mean, the microplastics are terrifying. The amount of clogged drains we have. I appreciated that when you the office sent out the email, sort of kind of pre-briefing this presentation, we had support from our DPW director. I would just if I was going to be nitpicky, I understand that the Department of Taxation is technically administrating this or enforcing it. But for me, when I go to a store, if I have forgotten my bags and it's a place where they charge for this, to me, I mean, Whole Foods already does this, right? And many other places, but it's a charge. It's a charge of service provided. It's something that now you have to buy because you forgot to bring it. I don't really see it as a tax, but I understand why that language is used. Colleagues?
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation and appreciate the work. Highlighting the end of life for our landfill is a critical piece to this story. I do have some questions. So, just in terms of the execution of the bag tax, obviously, I'm very much in support. I also appreciate that while simple, things require people to get done. And when we're talking about taxes and the revenue split, these are things that need to be managed, whatever the amount is. And so I wonder, in the budget that will be presented for this upcoming fiscal year, is the administration including any additional staff to oversee? I mean, we don't have a great tax, a track record. Right. So I'm just wondering, how are we going to make sure that this works? And not only on the collection of the tax and the splitting of the tax, but also in using the funding, if that's a dedicated stream that's going to go towards environmental cleanups and such. There will need to also be staff, I would presume, to oversee that. So I'm wondering how this is impacting the upcoming budget.
Well, I'll take you the first part of the question, just to provide some clarity. The administration of the tax is through a self-reporting form. Actually, I listed it on one of the slides. It's the form ST-9 retail sales and use tax. That's offered through the state. It's a self-reported number that retailers report monthly to the state tax board. That dollar amount is then they just report the net. So that first year they'll report 3 cents per bag, and all following years they'll send back 4 cents per bag. That fund stream is then remitted to the city. Part of this work will have to set up a special fund that provides, the use language is restricted to these 3 items: environmental cleanups, recycling education, and the distribution of bags. That special fund creation is done through an ordinance. So I don't imagine that it would, well, actually, I know Sheila's here, so I'm not sure if there are additional administrative burdens that would be included as part of that establishment. But once it is established, it should be sort of self-fulfilling.
Yeah, thank you. And then on the note about the single-use plastics reduction, how is your team currently measuring the amount of single-use plastics in the city now? And so that we can ensure that we are able to keep up with that.
Right.
And I also was curious about the schools, which understand that they operate separately, but I would presume that when it comes to single-use plastics, there are considerable use on the school side as well.
Also a great point. We monitor our waste through reports that DPW shares with our office. These are reports that come through our commercial or our residential recycling program. Internally, it is difficult to find the data on how to track actual waste stream and the reduction of those waste streams. The goal is to have better reporting through shared data sources with DPW and our regional collectives of CVWMA. They are very good at providing our accurate data for the waste streams.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for this. Just a quick question about the enforcement of this. Knowing that this is a self-reported mechanism by the retailers, how, I guess, and knowing that there's other localities and you guys have done your homework on this, how are other localities ensuring that retailers are accurately reporting these numbers? And are they seeing that maybe these numbers are lower than they should be?
That is a great question. So we know that larger retailers have an easier time adapting to this type of legislation. They have point of sale systems that then automatically account for the bags that are purchased at the till. For smaller retailers like convenience stores or smaller pharmacies, there may be some sort of off the books way of noting how many bags are sold at the point of sale. There's certainly going to be some self-reporting numbers that may not be accurate or reflect the reality of the number of bags that were actually distributed at the point of sale. It's interesting because the numbers in Virginia, there's a a nationwide report that just came out in 2024 called Plastic Bag Taxes That Work. And their estimation is that every individual uses 365 plastic bags per year. So that's 1 plastic bag per day. If we use those numbers, the revenue generated from such a tax like this is much, much larger. So the reality of this type of tax influencing human behavior, the jury's still out. The benefit is that it does generate some revenue to do environmental cleanups and education.
Yeah, and it's a start. So
yeah,
that's helpful. Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, we are going to skip ahead and we are going to move the boards and commissions to April, but I will give a quick staff report. Finance. Sorry, that's, yeah. Come on up.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting us to address you today. I'm here to speak about the rebate checks that recently went out. My name is Jamie Atkinson. I'm the Director of Revenue Administration here at the city. I emailed all of you yesterday about that issue with these checks that I sent out earlier this week, some of which included an incorrect payee line. So I'm going to provide some specifics of that issue as well as walk you through the steps I'm taking to remediate. So I'd like to start with the customer-facing impact before we get into the sausage making. Some customers have received rebate checks with an incorrect name on the payee line. This is a known population, so no action is needed by the property owners. We will be canceling and reissuing the affected checks with that corrected information. Residents who have received those checks with the incorrect payee lines can destroy the checks. We do not need them back. And I encourage any residents with concerns or questions to reach out to us via RVA 311. That creates a ticket that we can track and trace through to completion. So what happened? This is a system issue as well as a procedural issue. Generating these rebate checks required moving information between multiple data systems and introducing a manual process in Excel to convert the data into a usable format for this purpose. In the process of manipulating the source data, the payee field was incorrectly overwritten in a subset of the population. As many of you know, I'm working to consolidate revenue operations within the RVA Pay platform. Full integration in RVA Pay will eliminate our reliance on these manual processes, and I will be able to utilize system controls and reports to identify the issues in a timely fashion going forward. As for procedures, this error was not identified during my quality control review. Clearly, that quality control review was insufficient. And I'm taking steps to make sure that I have a much more rigorous process going forward. Anytime we introduce a manual process for these rebate checks, I will utilize a robust statistical sampling procedure similar to the process that we currently have in place for personal property annual bill generation. This is a process we are already familiar with. We had not rolled it out for this purpose, and that's my responsibility. I should have. Additionally, I've actively recruited and brought in external resources to support these processes, as well as focused on developing and supporting our existing talent. Going forward, we will have both the procedures and the staffing required to utilize a layered approach to ensure the quality of my deliverables. I've initiated a thorough scrub of this data set to make sure that I have a comprehensive understanding of the issue, how it happened, and how to avoid it happening again in the future. I anticipate that analysis and rework to add about 4 days to my timeline. My initial findings are that 6,200 checks were produced and mailed with the incorrect information. Again, we have those checks, so we know what we need to do. We'll be sending out letters to the affected property owners, as well as canceling those checks and reissuing them. I'm committed to transparency, and while I'm happy to share what I have at present, I ask that you permit me the time to complete this analysis and provide updates as additional information becomes available. A few things I do want to clarify. The only field impacted by this error was the payee field. The address, parcel, and calculations are correct. The impacted subset of the population constitutes about 10% of the total rebate population. That percentage is way too high. But I do want to emphasize that most checks are unaffected and they are still valid and able to be cashed. Finally, at no point was any taxpayer information released or compromised in any way. The error is mine. I own it. I will fix it. It will not happen again. I am happy to return at your convenience to provide more information, and I'm available to take any questions you have at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. I just want to say thank you for how you have handled this situation. This is exactly what I think good culture should look like in City Hall. You're owning it. You're giving us information that is relevant to the taxpayer, and you're outlining steps and follow up. So I really do appreciate. It's not the mistake that's made; it's how one deals with the mistake that is made. This may not be a question for you. This might be a question for Ms. White, but I had been under the impression, in terms of timing of these, I had been under the impression that these were slated to be sent in January or February. So knowing that they're coming out now, can you just, I've had a few taxpayers wonder where that check is.
Thank you for the question. My name is Sheila White, Director of Finance for the City of Richmond. In the past, we did try to get them out in February. This year's been a little abnormal in that we rolled out this little thing called the business portal, and that's really taken a lot of our staff time and hours focusing on that. So we wanted to make sure that we got it out by this statutory deadline, which is March 31st, which is Monday. We're going to get it out by April 4th, which is not desirable, but we do want to take the time to make sure we do the scrub. Because there wasn't, the precedent was when we did it in 22, we did get it out in February. We tried to get it out right afterwards. It was just a different circumstance. We had more experienced staff at that time that was used to dealing in Munis and getting the data out and getting it transferred over. Those people who did that time are no longer with us, which is unfortunate, which is kind of why we are where we are. But we going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and we're going to make sure that we get those checks out as soon as possible.
Thank you. So I have to push back a little bit. Ms. Atkinson, you took all of the accountability for this, and I certainly applaud you for doing so. But if this ultimately came down to one person's error, then that's the issue. This is a reflection of a broken system, and things are not going to work if it comes down to one person.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, so I think the bigger issue for me is not that the error happened, but that we didn't catch it. We had a quality control process in place that it did not work. It passed through multiple hands. Ultimately, that responsibility falls to me. I approved those checks to go out, so it is my responsibility. And I have put into place processes and staff so that going forward, we have a plan. We can do the statistical analysis of the bills. Eventually, once we're fully in RVA pay, we'll be able to run analytics that will do a lot of that for us. So it won't be a person checking it. I mean, there will be obviously human checking it as well, but we can automate a lot of that, and we should. We have the tools available to us. We just haven't deployed them yet. So I do expect this whole process to be much better going forward.
Thank you. So how many checks went out total?
Well, they're still printing, so they were up until yesterday.
Total checks, I think that hit the street will have been printed, have been 22,000. Actually mailed, I don't have that number, but we can get that for you and we'll report it back.
So you said about 10% of the checks, so then there are about 2,000 errors, is that correct?
No, there's 6,000.
6,000 errors.
The total check count.
There, 59,673 is the number of checks that will go out.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like a massive effort, and I appreciate why we came to moving forward with a refund. But I think it's important to emphasize that these efforts are not without a cost. So, Ms. White, how many people in the department touch this effort? How much time does this take to do these types of refund?
So there's quite a bit of planning that goes into this. From Jamie's team alone, there's probably about 4 people that are going to touch it, but that doesn't include, we have components in DIT that support us. They support us in the check printing process, also in file transferring. We use the assessor's file, so there's a little bit of a component of what we get from the assessor's office. And then also we have our AP and disbursement team that supports getting the checks out the door. So that's not talking about, also we have to coordinate with our vendor as well. This time when we did this back in 22, we used our normal printer. This time we upgraded to go to a high-speed printer so we could get it done quicker, because that was actually a month-and-a-half long process. It took a lot of time to get it done. So there are a substantial amount of resources that go into supporting this rebate effort and getting it right.
So I would like just to hear from your perspective, what is it that, in your capacity leading the finance team, what is it that you would be able to do or to support providing the additional, support, checking or, again, because I know you must agree with me, right? This cannot all fall on Ms. Atkinson.
Absolutely. I think you touched on it a little bit earlier when we were going through the presentation from Deputy Director Redmond, as she was talking about staffing and retaining good staff. I think a lot of this comes down to retaining the talent that we have. Jamie and I have spent an enormous amount of time really trying to recruit and keep our good folks. Frankly, when you have to work a lot of overtime and you have a lot of challenges in getting your work done, that doesn't make for the best environment. So we're really working hard to fix that. So I think part of it is getting our whole team stabilized. We recognize now we're in the middle of a culture shift. We're moving from a very kind of finance, single siloed vision to we have to be customer facing. We have to realize that ultimately our job is customer service. And so we're putting an emphasis on that. When you make those cultural shifts, you change the way you hire and you change the way you retain. So we're really focused on making sure we get the right people in the seats, that we support the people that we have, and that they have the tools that they need to be able to do their job and do it effectively and not feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to end up on the paper or something, on the front page of the paper, something doesn't go right. So for me, in terms of what I see that we need is we really need to make sure that we're investing in our folks and making sure that they have the appropriate, upskilling them. If they're going to be with us, we've got to train them. We've got to make sure that they have the skills that they need to deliver the services that they've been called to do. And then we have to make sure that the environment that they're in, that they have the ability to fail, but fail forward. So that, if you make a mistake, it's not fatal. You can still recover. It's all about what you do after you make the mistake, discover it, point it out, and let's start to go then into how do we fix this? I'd like to point out, I think Jamie did a fantastic job. As soon as she figured out what happened, by the end of the day that day, we had communicated it to you. And that's the way we want it to be. We don't want you to have to guess. I don't want you to hear from the residents. We actually got a 311 call that alerted us that there was something strange going on. And so I sent it to Jamie. Jamie got right on it, did the research. And then by that time we had the answer and we're like, okay, now it's about how do we contain it? So it's those type of things, having the support all around for our employees so they feel comfortable when they make a mistake to be able to come forward and say, hey, I made a mistake, and that mistake isn't fatal for them.
Thank you. Another question. So if you could provide, what was the timeline? When did council adopt and approve moving forward with the rebate? And was that sufficient time to be able to effectively roll it out? I'm curious too if you flagged any concerns on being able to execute on such a large scale initiative, given the vacancies and turnover that you've had in the department. Were there conversations that you had with administration about recognizing that something might fall through the cracks?
So I think the timeline was sufficient. I think we ran into some of the things that we didn't expect was we had some turnover. We knew that we would ultimately do it after we completed our collections for the first half. And so that would put us into January anyway, because we're really, really busy from November, getting the file ready, getting the bills out the door until that January 15th, after everyone's come in and paid their bills. This year, we had the water crisis. So that January 14th, instead of that being the cutoff, then it got pushed to the end of January. But still, we're working on it, right? Because a lot of people still, they pay their mortgage pays their taxes. So we get the bulk of that comes to us through the mortgage companies. So we're still working on it. I think what really brought us down kind of to the line this time is that we just had new people in, and learning and kind of getting your bearings on this. It is a simple task, but it also is a detailed task, and knowing that you've got to move out of one system and then format that data to go into another system. It does take some intricacies, and you're going to have to do a little bit more checking. If you worked in, I don't know what your background is, but if you worked in projects before, you always do your QA needs to be a statistical sample that reflects your population so you can catch anything like that. You can't just spot check it. So even if you go through, you might do 100, but you really needed to do 260 to see and catch that error. And so that's what we do on our personal property side, that I think if we had done it on this side, we would have had plenty of time and we would have made it. It just, this time, there were some things that even if we, had even in October, we wouldn't have been able to foresee the water crisis was going to come and kind of eat a little into our time. So
Great. And do you have documented standard SOPs for this? And is there someone on your team that focuses on developing that documentation? And is there documentation that exists for issuance of the rebates?
I don't think I can answer that question because I think there may be something, but I'm not certain.
We were not able to find anything.
Okay.
So because this isn't one of our regularly scheduled processes, we do have SOPs for many of our regular billings. For this, since it's, it has been done before, but not by anyone currently on my staff. So we looked through old files. We were not able to find any sort of that type of documentation, which would have been very helpful. But going forward, we will create that. It's important that we have, attrition is going to happen in any organization, and we need to be prepared to pivot and prepared to provide the services that the city deserves.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jamie. And I'm sorry, I just want to add, we are working, so we do have an inventory. This should be on our inventory of what is fulfilled and what is not fulfilled. And we do publish all of our policies through our Power DMS tool. So we're making every effort to move to where we are well executed from the SOP perspective.
Thank you. And Ms. Atkinson, were you working for the city in 2022? So you were new.
Yes.
So again, I just want to say that I really think that I find it difficult to think that the blame falls just on you, Ms. Atkinson, given that this was new to you as well. It really does emphasize the importance of having those SOPs in place. And I would encourage you, Ms. White, to work with your team to put that documentation together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one last thing. This seems like a very archaic process. And I think it's clear unless something changes with council and the appetite for adjusting the real estate taxes, this may be something that happens on an annual basis. That being said, are there any, a lot of this comes down to process and systems. Is there a a system that you could find that, I mean, when I get a check from the IRS, I don't get a check, I get a direct deposit. Like you said, the majority of your customers are paying their real estate taxes through their mortgage companies, which you have access to. So why aren't we doing this in a 2025 kind of way?
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. And I don't know, Jamie, if you don't mind, I'll take this. We are moving to modernize our processes. We are literally living into GL. So the Munis system is an entire ERP in and to itself, and Oracle. So we're moving into our front end being Oracle, and that's when you hear us talk about RVA Pay. That's going to move there. The assessor has also upgraded their system. So now that they're, nearly done with their piece, then we can start to integrate with them. It becomes a straight through process. It never leaves our ERP. So I don't go from one ERP into another. That automatically modernizes it. The next step would be to do what you're talking about, is the more information we have from taxpayers, the more we can interact with them digitally. And we want to get there, but we're not there yet. So it is a iterative, step-by-step process. I'll just say that I've been working on systems for the past 5 years that I've been here. When I got here, Oracle hadn't been updated since 2014. I got here in 2020, and we were out of support. So the vendor said, we're not going to support you anymore if you don't go to the next step. So that's how far we've come, to the point we're on our current platform. We're on a current version of Oracle, but we still need to integrate fully with all of our surrounding systems. And it never should come out of one system and have to be manipulated to go into the other. It should be a straight through integration. This is kind of fixing the sins of the past and our current processes, and we're just taking them one by one. So we're just not done yet. And hopefully by the time if we get to the next one, if this happens, we have to do it again, we'll have an automated way that I can take it, if I'm still in Munis, that I can take it out of Munis and it goes right into Oracle without my team having to touch it at all. That's the ideal. If I'm not already, my front end is Oracle and it just goes straight into my AP workbench.
Thank you.
Thank you. And please invite us back. We'd like to tell you more. And be happy to, if you'd like to come and visit us, we'd be happy to host you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, as I mentioned before, the attendance policies for boards and commissions is going to be punted until the April meeting. Just really quickly, the next GovOps agenda the next GovOps meeting is Wednesday, April 23rd. DPU will come to present again on lead service replacement program, which hopefully means that they'll have lots of good updates from their audit meeting. The Department of IT will be presenting on enterprise resource planning, those ERPs that Ms. White just talked about. The Office of Council Chief of Staff will be providing a list of all required reports to council. And there is a Public Utilities and Service Commission meeting that met last week. They are working with DPU on rate setting and billing. And the next meeting is on Thursday, April 10th, and we'll focus on DPU's budget across each of the utilities. So I highly recommend anybody going to that and listening to that. So with that, I think we are done with the agenda and we can adjourn.